All right, we are back here on SportsLine. Our phone lines are open, 737-7767 if you'd like to get in. We're talking the Titans situation with Titans Radio Rhett Bryan here. And Rhett, I laid this out a little bit on our website, newschannel5.com this afternoon, but the one thing that got me from the press conference yesterday, and as I said before, I thought Steve Underwood was overly prepared and came off very impressive in terms of what he was talking about and what he was looking for in a GM and in a head coach, and how he sort of evaluated the season and what they were trying to do. That being said, probably the number one thing I hear from fans on this program or when I talk to them in public or wherever is the question, who are our owners? Do they care about this franchise? Are they selling this franchise? Basically, what's the deal? And since Amy Adams-Strunk has become the controlling owner a little over 9 months ago now, we have heard nothing from her. She didn't talk when she assumed that role. She hasn't talked during the course of the season. She didn't talk yesterday or when she fired the head coach 7 games into the year. Now, I will say this, for those people who say that they don't think the family cares, I think Amy Adams-Strunk has thrown out a very good example this year that she sure as heck cares, because things started going south in that Houston game. What happens? 2 days later, she fires Ken Whisenhunt. The season ends up not where they want to be. What happens? The next day, the GM's out. So I think she's shown that she wants to win as bad as anybody just in her short time. But there are so many questions about this team right now. Where is she? And what can we tell fans about who she is, who this family is, and what their plans are?
Well, and I'm glad to hear you bring that up, because for anyone that says they don't care, they proved that on November the 3rd when they released Ken Whisenhunt from his duties as head coach of the team.
For $15 million. $15 million to walk away.
He's going to be handsomely paid for quite a while to walk away. And maybe she's the kind of lady that actions speak louder than words, because you also mentioned about what happened yesterday with General Manager Rustin Webster. Just as far as a brief history, I don't know all of the family, but she's obviously one of Bud Adams' daughters, Bud and Nancy's daughters, and then they have another daughter that's Susie Smith, who is married to Tommy Smith, who was the former guy driving the train up until a few months ago. And then they had a son that passed away years ago, and his widow and the children, Barclay and Kenneth Adams, and Kenneth, who works in the organization, make up the other parts of it. And I'll say this. The fan in me, I understand what Titans fans are thinking, and it's like, who are these folks? Why won't she talk? It's a very big curiosity for me as well. I'd like to hear what she has to say. But it's obvious that Mr. Underwood, at least up and through yesterday and all through these last few months, is the mouthpiece and the vocal part for the family. And maybe she's a very private lady and doesn't, care to speak in front of the folks. But I'll say this. I think it would ease some folks' minds, at least to hear what she has to say. Because obviously she's connected with everything that Mr. Underwood told us yesterday and the day that they fired Ken Whisenhunt. Mm-hmm. She's watched this team every day, multiple hours a day. She has been on the job in her office and then commuting to all the games, all 20 of them, including the preseason. And that doesn't mean she gets like a gold star for being a good owner because she was in attendance, but she cares. And I think it's obvious that she does. She just hasn't spoken yet. To your point, though, do the fans want what Al Davis was with the Raiders, what Jerry Jones is with the Dallas Cowboys, micromanagement, and just in everything all the time? Because we've heard the stories. Right. I remember a story that Warren Sapp told years ago when he left the Buccaneers and was a free agent with the Oakland Raiders. And they were in a preseason game, and they were in a certain defensive formation, and all of a sudden they got a call from the sideline to change defensive formations. And he's like, what's going on? And he asked his coach, and he's like, Mr. Smith, he didn't like, Al Davis doesn't like what he's seeing up there. He's called an audible, basically. And Jerry Jones on the sidelines, right. I think those kinds of examples, and Daniel Snyder in Washington has made it not the norm, but more acceptable. They want to see those kinds of things have made it more curious for the fan base. And when we have owners that don't say anything and don't, but you have to look at the other parts of the 32 and those other owners in those other cities. They don't talk all the time. They don't talk every day. I'm sure there's
some of those are more stable, and that's the thing. Is your point is valid? I said in the column, and I've said many times on this program, you want the anti-Jerry Jones, in my opinion. You don't want a micromanager. You want somebody who's going to sit there, hire smart football people, sign the checks, and then get the heck out of the way. That's the ideal owner, and they don't have to be in Nashville to do that. If they want to keep the family place in Houston and do that, that's just fine. The problem is, in the last 2 years and change, you've had the longtime owner pass away, which causes some instability. You sort of have a question of who is going to become the controlling force of this. It became Susie Adams, or Susie Smith, who then put Tommy Smith in charge. That did not go well, to the point that it almost appears, at least from the outside, that there was some level of a family coup that then switched the controlling ownership over to Amy Adams Strunk. And now she hasn't spoken at all. That's why fans want to hear something. And these are the people who, when you look at Nissan Stadium, it's half empty in December this year. And those are the people you're trying to get to believe in your team and go purchase the tickets and fill the seats on the cold days in November and December when the season's in doubt, and buy all your merchandise. That's who you're catering to. And right now they're not, by not stepping up and talking about it. And I think people just want to know. They want to know the direction, where you're going, what you want to do here. And it's hard to have complete faith until she does that. And I think that's the tough thing about all this is I would love to see her step up at some point. And it doesn't have to be every day, but at some point in this process, as she's making two critical hires, step forward and say, this is who I am, this is what we're about, this is what we're doing, here's our hires.
And by the way, the team is not for sale.
Right. Which Steve Underwood, to his credit, said yesterday, we never have been for sale, and we are not for sale right now. And they've repeatedly said that, but we haven't heard that once from somebody in the family.
And you know, in a perfect world, maybe she has maybe even a videotape statement where she sits in her office from Houston and addresses those things at the very least. And I think in a perfect world, maybe she has something where she comes to Nissan Stadium and has a Titans Town forum with some of the ticket holders and PSL holders. Maybe, you know, and I'm sure maybe something's been said to her, especially after the comments in the presser yesterday. Maybe Mr. Underwood, who said he talks to her daily, sometimes 2-3 hours a day, because she's very involved in this. You know, maybe they address that in the coming days and weeks. And I think as a Titans fan, if I were a Titans fan at home, I would want to hear some things to, like you said, here's our plan, here's the direction. And by the way, the team is, without question, not for sale.
I think one thing, all good points, and I think Steve Underwood said this yesterday, and I want to reiterate it, is from the people I talked to over there, and I know you're very well connected at St. Thomas Sports Park and throughout the organization, but the feeling that she's aloof or that the family is aloof of the process, that's not right.
No.
I think it's the perception out there that they could change by talking, but just as you said, she's constantly on the phone with many different departments there, most notably Steve Underwood, the president, and talking to him constantly throughout the time. She comes in, stopped in a training camp this year. She was at every game, as you said, preseason, regular season, home and away. She's here when she needs to be. She's involved in the way she needs to be. And the other thing that we probably shouldn't overlook is Kenneth Adams, who you mentioned as you're going through the ownership structure, one of the grandsons. He's got 11% of the team. He's in the building every day in a fairly high-ranking position right there.
And has been full-time in that building for 8 years now.
Right. And so there are fingerprints of that family all throughout the organization, and they are very much in touch of what's going on, whether it seems like that sometimes or not. But perception oftentimes is reality, and right now their optics aren't very good.
Sure.
Let's go to, you mentioned hearing from some people at home. Let's go to the phone line. 737-7767 is our number. Let's hear from David. David, good evening. You're first up tonight on SportsLine.
Hey, Steve, good evening. You know me, in a way, I'm still a big Titans fan. But I've said for years that I think their glory years are gone. I don't know whether it comes from the head office. I don't know if it's just going to take a complete turnaround in there, but you can tell it. You know, your hopes are up during preseason. They may win the first game and everything, but I think they beat Tampa Bay. Okay, they beat Tampa Bay. But man, ever since then, it just went downhill. And I just, in a way, they haven't done anything since McNair passed away, since Eddie Jordan, since the old days and everything. I don't know whether you can take the players that they've drafted great players, and some players it just stunk. But I just do not see, unless I see a complete change. I just think the glory years are gone.
Well, David, we appreciate the call. I think here's the thing. Look, the glory year was a Super Bowl run, and it was very early on and probably spoiled people around here. They are departed from that. But the great thing about the NFL, as you know, Rhett, it doesn't take a lot to turn things around, and they've got a pretty good piece to build around now in the franchise quarterback of Marcus Mariota.
And to your point, that 99 Super Bowl year, they were beaten by the St. Louis Rams, who the prior year was 4-12. Mm-hmm. And the next year, 2000 really should have been the year they went to the Super Bowl. They lost to the Ravens in that divisional game over at the stadium in the 2000 season, and that's another team that had a poor year the prior year. My point being, Pete Rozelle, the former commissioner of the National Football League, had a dream that all of this parity and everybody gets a chance. And to kind of ease David's mind, they have the first pick in this year's draft. Right. That they can either get a top-notch player or trade for lots of other players if they have the right tango partner. But you're right, they have a franchise quarterback in Marcus Mariota. They still have Delaney Walker under contract. They still have Kendall Wright under contract. They have guys like Jarrell Casey and Derek Morgan and Brian Arakpo under multiple-year, long-term contracts. They've got their kicker and their punter and their long snapper signed up for 4 more years. There are lots of things to build off of. They just need someone to get in the driver's seat at the general manager position, continue to procure talent, have more hits than misses in those draft picks, which it's a crapshoot sometimes. Right. But there's a lot to look forward to. They've just got to get things right with these 2 main hires.
That's absolutely true. And Steve Underwood talked about, especially with the GM, how important talent evaluation and being able to handle that top pick and free agency is going to be for this team. Free agency, by the way, they got a lot of cap space. So if they want to make big moves there, they can do it this offseason. The other thing, when you talk about how close things are, it may not seem like it from the outside. This is a team that went 3-13. They were 2-14 last year. That's only 1 win better on the surface. But when you look at it, and we were just going over these stats or numbers before we came up here today, there were 8 games that the Titans played in this year that were decided by a touchdown or less. They won 2 of them, but that means they lost 6 of them. If you could swing even a couple more of those games around, now you're talking about a 5-win season. Split those remaining 6. It's a 6-win season. If you do that, and a couple of them are early, Ken Wisenhunt's probably still the coach of the Titans right now. Rustin Webster may not be out as GM because you would have seen marked improvement from last year to now, and people would be talking about, frankly, how big of a success this was. Moving into next year, this team could maybe compete for the division or whatever. But that's the reality. They didn't win those games. They weren't good enough to do it. But they're not that far away. This team appeared to be much better than what they were last year.
No, and you're right. And let's underline it with this, with the whole 30,000-foot view of all 32 teams and all 256 regular season games played. 131 of those, over half of those, were decided by 7 points or less. Didn't just happen for these guys in two-tone blue.
Yeah, no question. It was a year of parity in the NFL, and you always see it, too, as we talk about the parity. Redskins, NFC East champs this year.
Oh, wow.
They were last place in the division last year, and every year it seems like you have a team like that was down and out the year before, and then all of a sudden they're in the playoffs the next year. The Panthers, last year, they were a team that was struggling. They were well below 500. They get hot at the end of the year. Now this year, they've been the best team in the NFL throughout the course of the year. Let's go to the phone line. 737-7767 is the number. Good evening, Bob. Hello.
How are you?
Doing well.
You know who I'd like to hear from on the Titans situation more than anybody is Neil O'Donnell.
Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate that call. I don't know what OD's up to right now, but I'm sure he has an opinion, that's for sure. But everybody has an opinion right
absolutely. He, I don't know if this carries through the offseason, but he had a regular segment on 104.5 The Zone, I think certainly on Monday mornings during the 9 o'clock hour all through the season. And you can certainly listen to those, to the flagship station of Titans Radio to get his opinion, because he's a guy that has never lacked one for sure, and has the right to do it playing the quarterback position as long as he did. So.
That is absolutely true. We got to take a break here. We will come back. Rhett Bryan from Titans Radio. He's our guest here tonight. We're talking about the Titans organization, whether it be that structure at the top. We'll get into that a little bit more here. We can talk about some general manager candidates, also head coaching candidates. Mike Mularkey, interim coach, 2-7 down the stretch of the season. Just where does he rank in the list of candidates? Does he have a legitimate shot to get the job permanently? We'll discuss that plus more of your phone calls right after this on SportsLine on News Channel 5+.